What's the most mysterious or unexplainable thing that has ever happened to you?
When I was a child, I had a friend named Jojo. Interestingly, my twin brother also used to play with him. We both remember him as an elderly man with missing fingers on his right hand. Our parents always said they had never seen this man. Moreover, they noticed that my brother and I would sometimes disappear from the house for several hours, but we always came back as if nothing had happened. When we grew up, we decided to look for photos of Jojo to figure out who he was. But in every picture of the two of us where we remember him being with us, he simply wasn't there. This is one of the most mysterious things in my life, and I still can't explain it.
When I was a kid, I went to a store with my mom and bought a lollipop with a pina colada flavor. On the way home, I accidentally dropped it into a storm drain. I was so upset because it was my favorite flavor. Sometime later, I was walking in a completely different area and suddenly found the exact same lollipop. It had the same bite mark and the same wrapper. It was the one I dropped. I was in shock. How could it have ended up there? To this day, I can't understand if it was just a coincidence or something unexplainable.
One day, I went to a school hockey match. Before it even started, I had a strange premonition. I felt like the puck was going to fly right at me. I even told my friends about it, but they just laughed. And guess what? During the game, the puck actually flew straight into my hands. I've never had such a clear premonition before, but that moment stayed with me for life. I still keep that puck as a reminder of this strange experience.
While studying in college, I received a letter from my grandmother. She was into genealogy and told me that I had a third cousin who was also studying at the same college. I couldn't have imagined it would turn out to be someone I was already friends with, and who was sitting right next to me when I read the letter. We were both shocked because all this time, we had no idea we were related by blood.
A few years ago, I decided to take a solo trip to a remote cabin in the woods. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, but what happened there still gives me chills. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the porch. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but the steps were too deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window, but there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard the doorknob rattling. I froze. The cabin door was locked, but the rattling continued for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and I saw a shadow move across the wall, even though there was no light source to cast it. I hid under the blankets until morning, too scared to move. When the sun finally rose, I packed my things and left immediately. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night.
This happened to my grandmother, and she swore it was true until the day she died. One evening, she received a phone call from her sister, who had passed away a year earlier. At first, she thought it was a prank, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. They talked for about 10 minutes, catching up like old times. My grandmother said her sister sounded happy and at peace. When my grandmother mentioned that she missed her, her sister replied, "Don't worry, we'll see each other soon." The call ended abruptly, and when my grandmother tried to call back, the number didn't exist. A week later, my grandmother passed away in her sleep. Was it a coincidence or something more? We'll never know.
This story comes from my uncle, who used to be a truck driver. One night, he was driving on a deserted highway when he saw a young woman standing by the side of the road, waving for help. He pulled over and she climbed into the passenger seat. She was quiet, but my uncle tried to make small talk. She said she needed to get to the next town, about 20 miles away. As they drove, my uncle noticed something strange. The woman didn't cast a shadow, even though the moonlight was bright. When he glanced over again, she was gone. He pulled over, thinking she might have jumped out, but there was no sign of her. When he reached the next town, he asked around, and someone told him that a young woman matching her description had died in a car accident on that same stretch of road years ago.
When I was a kid, my grandfather had an old grandfather clock in his living room. It was a family heirloom and it had been ticking for over a century. One night, my grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep. The next morning, we noticed something strange. The clock had stopped at exactly 3:07 a.m., the time the doctor said he had died. We tried winding it up again, but it wouldn't work. Even the repairman couldn't figure out why it had stopped. To this day, the clock remains frozen at 3:07 a.m., as if it somehow knew when my grandfather's time was up.
A few years ago, I was going through some old family photos with my mom. We came across a picture of my great-grandparents standing in front of their house in the 1920s. In the background, there was a man standing by the window, staring directly at the camera. I asked my mom who he was, but she had no idea. We asked other family members and no one recognized him. What's even stranger is that the house in the photo didn't have a second floor at the time, but the man appears to be looking out from an upstairs window. Who was he, and how did he end up in the photo? We still don't know.
Last summer, I went hiking with some friends in a remote forest. As we walked deeper into the woods, we started hearing faint whispers. At first, we thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. It sounded like multiple people talking, but we couldn't make out the words. We tried to follow the sound, but it seemed to move with us, always just out of reach. Eventually, we got spooked and decided to leave. When we got back to the trailhead, we asked a park ranger about it. He said there had been reports of similar experiences, but no one had ever found an explanation. To this day, I wonder what, or who, was whispering in that forest.